In 1236, a young girl of Provence crossed the English Channel to become a queen consort. Her name was Eleanor, at 13, the youngest daughter of the Count of Provence. Her 3 sisters had also married kings, so Eleanor was well versed in court politics and quite prepared to support her new husband. Henry III, King of England, was smitten the moment he saw her. At the time, and especially in arranged marriages, it was common for husbands and wives to maintain a tenuous association, chiefly centered on having and raising heirs. But this was not the case with Henry and Eleanor. The couple were uncommonly close, and their generosity toward one another was as wide as the Thames. Crowned at Westminster Abbey that very day, Eleanor of Provence was queen. But she would be far more than a royal bride. She had arrived with robust education, a love of romantic courtly ballads, and strong familial alliances with the thrones of 3 countries.
You are my treasure, my Eleanor. I place you above all the riches in my kingdom.
It is I who becomes enriched, my king.
Their marriage was unusually tender for the age. Henry adored her, and she stood as his closest partner. As his first order of business, Henry saw that she was given lands, titles, a well-equipped household, and a personal court of advisors from among her own relatives and allies. The king would come to regret importing so many foreign courtiers. They had 5 children: Edward, the heir; Margaret, future Queen of Scotland; Beatrice, who would become the Duchess of Brittany; Edmund, 1st Earl of Lancaster; and little Catherine, born functionally deaf, but adored by both parents.
One day, Eddie, you'll be a great knight and a credit to the crown, and your little brother shall be your noble squire.
You'll all be a credit to the crown, as long as you are content with the choices you make, and remain grateful for the circumstances fate has bequeathed upon you.
But joy would soon be shadowed by tragedy. Catherine died before her 3rd birthday. Henry and Eleanor were heartbroken and grieved bitterly for the lost princess. Henry was so grief-stricken, he kept her heart enshrined at Westminster Abbey.
It is right, is it not, that she rest amongst her most illustrious kin?
It is indeed, my lord, and well done, too.
Eleanor's family from Savoy flooded England, chief among them her uncle Peter. Ambitious, wealthy, deeply resented by the English barons. Beginning in 1240, Henry would grant Peter extensive lands and titles in England, including honorific baronies in multiple counties. The English lords and their heirs, who had counted those holdings as their own, couldn't help but take notice. One of those lords was Simon de Montfort, Henry's longtime best friend, and recently his brother-in-law as well. De Montfort and another Savoyard courtier entered into a dispute involving a debt. When Peter took the dispute to King Henry, Henry learned that Simon had named the king as guarantor of the debt. Had he asked, Henry would certainly have stood surety for his close companion, but he had not. De Montfort had taken liberties with the king's honor, and this would place a wedge between them, and germinate the seeds of discontent between the English barons and the Queen's relatives.
Majesty, mercy! I had hoped you would consider the debt a portion of your sister's dowry.
Hope is a poor blade indeed, my lord, and dangerous to its wielder when not tempered by wisdom.
When Henry crossed to France in 1253, he left Eleanor as regent of England. She ruled firmly, managing revenues, commanding officials, and even keeping the peace. Henry's forays into regaining the French lands surrendered by his father would meet with devastating failure, but Eleanor held the English throne resolutely until his return. It was common for kings to leave their queens behind as regents when they went on campaign, but this was largely a ceremonial position. Not so with Eleanor. King Henry even entrusted her with the powers of the Lord Chancellor, which would evade a woman's grasp for the next 760 years afterward. But when rebellion erupted in 1263, London turned against her. Eleanor, fleeing the city down the Thames, barely escaped a mob who pelted her barge with stones and debris. As so often is the case, the rebels shouted epithets and slurs regarding her heritage and ethnicity. But what had actually sparked the attack was her demand that they pay their back taxes. At the heart of the rebellion stood Simon de Montfort, brilliant, ruthless, and determined to break royal power. After the fracturing of their friendship, the final break with the king had come in 1252, when Henry put de Montfort on trial for human rights violations in Gascony. In 1258, de Montfort had led the Parliament of Oxford, which stripped Henry of much of his power. By 1263, de Montfort led an open rebellion against the crown, known as the Second Barons' Revolt. In May of 1264, Henry himself was taken prisoner at the Battle of Lewes.
You seduced my sister, insulted my wife, and betrayed my trust. Pray my army gets to you before I do, de Montfort.
Your army is destroyed, and your subjects loyal to me, your majesty. Save your prayers for your deliverance.
And with him, his son and heir, Edward. De Montfort effectively took control of the throne, using Henry as a puppet king to strengthen the provisions of Oxford and remake the nation to his tastes. Eleanor resolved to cut the strings and restore her dynasty to the crown. Eleanor fled to France, not in exile, but on campaign. She raised money. She hired soldiers. She built an army to rescue her king and her son. From abroad, she coordinated the counterattack. Her secret weapon was her beloved sister Marguerite, the Queen of France. Her resolve kept royalist hopes alive. At last, Edward escaped his captors using an ingenious subterfuge. As a royal captive, Edward enjoyed outdoor privileges. He was often allowed to ride the grounds with an escort of guards. One day, he proposed a game. The men should switch and ride their horses one by one until the fastest could be identified. As soon as it was, Edward rode off on it at breakneck speed, leaving his chagrined guards in the dust. In 1265, Edward rejoined his mother's waiting army. Their reunion was short-lived, however. Mindful of his filial duty, Edward led his army straight into the heart of the rebellion. At Evesham, Simon de Montfort was defeated and his rebellion destroyed. Edward had promised to uphold the provisions of Oxford to any man who broke from the rebellion and swore allegiance to the crown, crumbling de Montfort's forces. Edward assembled a strike force to personally ensure de Montfort never left the field of his final stand. Eleanor herself was far from the battlefield, but it was her determination, her resources, her strategy that made this victory possible. She had saved them both, husband and son, and with them the very dynasty they represented. When Henry died in 1272, Eleanor retired from politics. As Dowager Queen, she preferred spending time with her grandchildren to court intrigue. She entered Amesbury Priory, living in quiet devotion. She lived nearly 20 years beyond Henry, outlasting her enemies, her triumphs, and her sorrows. Eleanor of Provence was no mere consort. She was a regent, a commander, a savior of the English crown. Yet the histories of England remember her as a footnote of rebellion, or as the pretty royal adornment for which she was so often mistaken in life. In fact, she was the binding that kept her nation intact.